Let me start by saying I really wanted to enjoy Deliver Us Mars, and honestly at times I did, but when a game is built so heavily around the story being the selling point, everything around the story needs to be polished, from game mechanics to performance, but if those fail, it could be a chore trying to enjoy a story when those parts are so distracting to what the main experience is supposed to be. And that's how my playthrough felt. After playing straight through the game in about 8 hours in one sitting, I really enjoyed the story of Deliver Us Mars, and that's without ever playing the prequel Deliver Us the Moon. I was able to follow the story with no issues and really enjoyed the characters in the game. Speaking of which, a rough summary of the story is basically you play as Kathy Johansson, who went through some very intense family issues growing up that eventually leads to her going on a journey to try and save Earth while also trying to discover what her father set out to accomplish.
Sarah and Ryan are probably settling into their pod. I'll head back to the cockpit.
Be right there.
Now, not only was this story great to me, I really enjoyed the voice acting. I thought they nailed it out of the park. But that's about the end of what was good to me about Deliver Us Mars, because everything else feels like it's just subpar in quality compared to the voice acting. Like the animations, the characters have such a stiff, almost uncanny valley vibes to their mannerisms and movement. The bodies seem to be strangely proportioned at times, and this honestly takes away from the voice actors, because if you don't have animations that can match the quality of the actor, it will sometimes just straight up ruin what emotion the actor is trying to portray, which is such a shame, and the worst part is, it doesn't stop there. When I was playing through the game on my Series X, the frame rate was wildly inconsistent. At times I felt like I was running like a smooth oiled machine at 60 FPS, other times I felt like it might have been pushing 30 FPS. Now, was this unplayable? No, not by a long shot, but it's still terrible to have something this unoptimized when it's not exactly pushing any boundaries in the gameplay or graphics department. Not to mention the lack of settings like brightness was very disappointing to me. Even though I will say at times the game did boast some very stunning visuals that straight up brought a smile to my face, especially when you're looking down on the Earth from space, which leads to my next question: what exactly is the gameplay like in Deliver Us Mars? So first things first, this is not an open world game. You basically have missions where you need to go from point A to point B to point C. I'm fine with this. Not a big deal to me. The problem is the journey oftentimes was very repetitive. As you're going through these missions, you will encounter various puzzles and platforming sections. All of these puzzles are exactly the same in the sense of having the same design philosophy. You have various objects you need to power up with these energy beams. You do this by using these devices called stream transmitters. Then you have two other items you will use in various puzzles that either reduce the power of these beams or they allow them to split in two directions. That's it. That is how all the puzzles in the game are done, and I don't necessarily think that is a bad thing when a game does that as long as the other gameplay elements are interesting enough. But these puzzles are just very disappointing. And they even have this cute little robot named Ayla who is used in puzzles as well, but he is so underutilized, and that is disappointing because they could have been so much more creative with him. I hardly had a reason to use them outside of these small puzzles that basically consist of nothing but moving a camera around till these objects lined up. And if it wasn't for these puzzles building upon the story, it would have straight up been the worst part about the gameplay, but at least something satisfying came from them. Outside of all this, you have a laser that cuts stuff, and this mechanic was interesting in a few spots, but overall was nothing notable. The platforming was okay, Kathy controls really well movement-wise, and they even have a really interesting climbing mechanic where each trigger controls a pickaxe. Unfortunately, it doesn't really matter when the gameplay is this repetitive and boring through almost the whole game. Except I will say towards the very end of the game, there was one section I absolutely loved. It only lasted a few minutes, but I couldn't help but feel like if the whole game had this level of platforming, I would have felt completely different about it. Also, the few gameplay moments where you switch to a first-person perspective were also nice in mixing things up, even if it was fleeting. Unfortunately, the fact is, Deliver Us Mars failed to deliver a gameplay experience on point with the voice acting and story. Mars itself feels underutilized as a platforming set piece that could have been used very creatively, like in the opening puzzle when you first arrive on the planet, and even then it still wasn't done that great. Most gameplay elements end up just being repetitive with so much potential wasted, and the performance is what it is. It didn't stop me from playing through the game. It will probably be fixed at some point, but when it's just another issue on top of everything else, it's hard to ignore. With all that said, I don't hate Deliver Us Mars, but I find it hard to recommend to anyone who is looking for something more than just a story experience or a player who has played Deliver Us the Moon, even at the price point of $30. Thanks for watching, everyone. Talk to y'all whenever the next one is.